actually a study done at Harvard looking at how we talk about food and how it actually impacts our body physiology. So if we look at a salad, for example, with some chicken on it, and we think, oh, this is so depriving, I'm on a diet, so restrictive, we produce less full hormones. So that hormone leptin that signals fullness is reduced. So we're actually hungry after.
Yeah.
Whereas if we go with that salad and we say, oh my gosh, it's so nourishing and it's so filling, and oh my gosh, it's just so luscious and delicious, then our body actually secretes more of that leptin and we feel more satisfied. So how we speak about what we're doing impacts our body physiology. I think that's so wild. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on how we can reframe our mindset around this deprivation and restriction to cultivate a more positive relationship with our food and the healthy food. We always give comfort food and junk food like all these sexy terms and all these like just feeling of nourishment, whereas I think it should be the opposite, that we should talk about the foods that actually give us life in that way.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today, you guys, I am beyond excited to welcome a very special guest to the show. This guest, her name is Dr. Brooke Feinerman, and she is just a really dear friend of mine. She's a colleague of mine, and you guys are really in for a treat. She is an expert when it comes to the mental, emotional habits, behaviors, the mind-body connection, and how it's associated with dropping weight and keeping it off successfully. So a little bit about Dr. Brooke. So after graduating from Pepperdine University with a master's degree in clinical psychology, Dr. Brooke earned a doctorate from Pacifica Graduate Institute, where she specialized in somatic studies, which is the investigation of the connection between mind and body. Her interest in mind-body wellness subsequently led her to complete 2 certification trainings from Harvard University's Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, as well as becoming a certified yoga instructor. In addition, she's a member of the Institute of Coaching at McLean Harvard Medical School, which provides ongoing seminars, education, and research on coaching and well-being. She has presented her research at conferences both nationally and internationally. You guys, she is a big reason for many of the amazing success stories we have at PhD Weight Loss, because she does help with elevated coaching and our clients. So I know you are going to get so much out of today's show.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Brooke. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Dr. Ashley. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
Well, I just want to take a few moments to express my gratitude, because you have helped so many PhD weight loss clients in their journey. And I really don't think that the journey would have been so successful if it wasn't for your support. So from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful for everything that you've given to them.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to serve the community. I love serving that community, and I just love serving people in general. And I take it as a very high honor when someone trusts me with their story. And it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage to reach out when we're struggling with anything. And so I'm grateful for that. It's a wonderful opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, I had a client email me actually last week and was like, oh my gosh, Dr. Brooke has just changed my life in so many ways. I had no idea that going through this weight loss journey would open up so many things for me and let so many things go. You know, I think that weight loss, I always say, is a process of letting go. It's letting go of the fat weight, the excess weight that's no longer serving us. We're just done with it. And it's also letting go of all the emotions that are tied to it. And I found, like, my belief here is that if we only focus on the metabolism, on dropping the weight, but we don't focus on the mindset as well, then even if we drop the weight, I find that over time, the weight is going to match where the mindset is. Like, they're so strongly correlated. And I don't know if I said that clearly, but they really, I find that we have to let go of past traumas and emotions and a lot of the deep work for many people going through the weight loss process. So I just wanted to ask your perspective on that. Do you find something similar to that? Am I just making it up? Share with us. And if that is the case, why are they so intertwined?
Such a great question. And also, the PhD community is so fortunate to have a leader that understands that interconnection of the mind and the body, and also really understands behavior change. The PhD community and those that come to you for assistance with their weight and their health goals are blessed to have somebody that's at the helm that understands. Absolutely, you're right. And you said it beautifully. The interconnection of our mind and body really comes down to our emotions and our mindsets, as you're saying, or our belief systems impact our behaviors. And so when we're looking to have any behavior change in our life, we can't just think of it from that habit level in terms of I do this or I do that, especially when we want long-term change, because we can white knuckle something for a while, but what I find in my work with people, and these are the people that usually come to me through PhD or otherwise, is they have white knuckled it for a while, meaning they've kind of gotten themselves to do the behaviors they think they're supposed to do. And then they hit a wall, either motivation or the excitement of something new stops, or they're back in a cycle. And that happens because there are these beliefs or mindsets, or even maybe emotions, or how they have learned how to handle emotions that are keeping them stuck. And that over time, they revert back to that. So in order to have long-term change related to behavior or weight loss, it's so important to really start to understand what are the beliefs or mindsets I have that are keeping me stuck, or that I fall back into when things get stressful. And the same with emotions. How have I learned to deal with my emotions? And oftentimes these are through life experiences. We have learned from parents, coaches, caregivers, work, society, different messages about what emotions are okay or not okay, what emotions we feel comfortable with or not. And those emotions can actually really impact our capacity to stick to the goals we have for ourselves and to move forward in the behavior that we say we want to do.
Can you give an example around, I know you see many clients, but an example of someone who's come in with, say, emotional eating and how it's kept them stuck and how they've worked through it to move through the other side?
Absolutely.
Hey guys, quick interruption to the show to remind you about GlucoCut Plus, my latest supplement designed specifically for weight loss and maintenance. Weight loss can stress your body, it affects your thyroid, muscle mass, and metabolism. GlucoCut Plus is packed with patented ingredients to regulate your blood sugar for longer lasting energy, enhance fat burning, and support lean muscle and your thyroid health. We only use top quality ingredients and it's super effective. It's like this all-in-one for metabolic support. Visit drashleywellness.com, use code Ashley10 for 10% off your first purchase, or receive 20% off your first subscription order with free shipping. Plus, enjoy a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, back to the show.
So one I see a ton is actually related to anger. And that might seem like an interesting one to talk about, but I'm going to kind of unpack it. Before I do, I want to kind of give a few examples along lots of emotional eating habits so people kind of can maybe say, oh, that one's me or that one's me. So if someone's bored, right, you might go to food for stimulus. So people sometimes realize like, oh, I don't know why I eat when I'm like, nothing's wrong. I'm not particularly stressed, but they're noticing, oh, I'm eating because I'm bored. And it's because food can be a stimulus, right? It can give us sensations and make us feel better. People might go to food for celebration. Maybe they emotionally were trained as a young person when they did something right, they got a treat, or when they had a birthday, that was a time they felt loved and celebrated, or sharing meals with family was a time of connection. So when they're lonely, they might go to food. When they're tired, there are certain things that happen in the brain and body actually that make us reach for food. And then anger actually is this one that I want to talk about. So anger, what can happen there is if we don't have a good relationship with anger, and I mean healthy anger, not like yelling at people or taking it out at people, but noticing that anger has come up is actually just a data point for us that perhaps we don't have our needs and boundaries being met. Something about our needs and boundaries aren't being met. And so the natural response for any human is anger. Now, if we don't have a healthy relationship with our anger, we can take it out in behaviors that we're not super happy with, or we can use food to kind of push it down, right? And we can do that with lots of emotions. If we're uncomfortable with the emotion, we can kind of want to numb it out or distract. The other thing that can happen that I see with people that have come to me a lot of times around anger, and this happens for women, although for men too, is we might not have good boundaries if we're afraid of anger. And so how that plays out is somebody might feel like, I don't want to say no because I don't want to disappoint people, or I don't want to say no because I'm really afraid of conflict, and because conflict associates with anger for them. So this is all kind of not at the surface, right? It's unconscious. It's this deep
I think you're
belief
sharing my
mindset.
story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very common and very normal. Is like what I love to say to people too. There's nothing wrong with you. These are emotions. We're wired to have them. It's actually a beautiful part of being human. It's just learning, how do I manage it and how do I sit with it and choose something that's still aligned with my goals. There's this beautiful Viktor Frankl quote that says, between the stimulus and response, there lies a space. And in that space lies our growth and our freedom. And I love to tell people that, it's not bad to have any emotion. It's what we do with it and learning how to be with it. So in this case with anger, right? If someone is uncomfortable with anger, or have had a past with anger, that anger is frightening to them, or whatever it is, they're afraid of disappointing people because that feels like conflict, AKA anger. They might use food to numb out their anger that they have, or they might also notice that along with using the food to numb down their anger, they might have a hard time setting up boundaries. And then what will happen is they get in this pattern where they go through their day, or something's happening in their family, and they feel angry. Frustration is a part of anger too. They feel like they don't have their needs being met. They kind of feel frustrated. And so they can push through all day. Then they get to the end of the day, and maybe there's someone that's like eating in the evening. They're actually not being able to really, during the day, set those boundaries they need, or say no to things, or stand up for themselves in a healthy way, in order to create enough space that they don't get to the end of the day and feel totally washed out, burnt out, angry, frazzled. And if they don't have this ability to be without emotion, they get to the end of the day and it feels pretty activating. And so they will use food to try to calm their nervous system and kind of escape that feeling and that sensation. And then that can become a pattern, right? And over time, that's where people get stuck, because they don't really necessarily even recognize it's anger. They just think like, oh, I'm a people pleaser. And it's like, well, that's a part of the stress response, actually, is what I like to teach people. Being a people pleaser is a response to stress of feeling like there might be conflict. So I hope that sussed out for you an example of how at least one emotion can get in the way.
Yeah. So then what would be the coaching around that? How would you pull someone through that to the other side in a successful manner?
Yeah. So with everything, with any emotion that we've named even here today, what I always like to invite people to think about is, what is the belief I have about that emotion, right? So for anger, is it I believe that it's scary, or it's not okay to feel that, or maybe if it's sadness, someone might say, oh, I believed I had to be happy all the time in order to be loved and accepted. So what I would always say is, if you notice there's any emotion in particular you're struggling with, ask yourself, get curious, right? What's the belief I have about that emotion that makes it hard for me to sit with it or be with it? Or what's the thought I have? If you're like, I don't really have a belief about it, think about like, what are the thoughts I have about that emotion? And then challenge those, right? And this kind of goes into some of the things that help with emotional processing, right? Learning how to notice our thoughts or our beliefs and challenge them, and then eventually reframe them. And by reframing them, we give ourselves a new kind of framework to work within about, is this an emotion I can give myself permission to feel, at least to express? And then, building little habits would be helpful as well. That would be kind of the end stage that I would do with people about, a habit about how do you start to create healthy boundaries, right? How do you create that pause for yourself so you can learn how to practice sitting with the discomfort? And then what kind of things can you rehearse to say, like with anger, to give yourself permission to maybe let people down and say no? What does that look like? And so then building those behaviors, and at the end step, once you've kind of reworked the belief around it's not even possible for me, and get to a place where you have a new framework, you can then start to build new habits and behaviors on top of that, and start to practice those in little ways so you get success and then feel encouraged. Similar to any behavior change around food or anything, you want to really break goals down into smaller bits so you can get victory and then get more confidence. Like, oh yeah, this is something I can do.
So is it safe to say that stress and emotional eating is really a protective mechanism?
Definitely. It's a coping mechanism for sure. Oftentimes if you even Google stress eating, what you'll find is a ton of information around it being a coping mechanism. And all we mean by that is it's a way that we deal with sensations, feelings, emotions, or thoughts that are uncomfortable for us. And we use it to help ourselves either numb out or push it down or distract from it. the interesting thing about once we build these patterns, there's also, as we're talking about holistically, these neurochemicals that are released in the brain that then reinforce it. And there's also parts of the brain and how our bodies are made that actually cravings increase when we get stressed, right? And we have this desire to actually seek out high energy, fast burning foods when we're stressed. So like high fatty, high salt, high sugar, because of the resources that the brain thinks it needs in order to deal with a threat. Even if threat was just an email and we don't necessarily need any high density food to deal with the email, our brain might send us all of these neurochemicals that's saying, ooh, with adrenaline and then the follow up of cortisol, like I need something to get me to really be able to meet this threat. And so we find ways that we can cope with emotions or stress, but we can get stuck in these patterns of just reaching for the food as a fast way to deal with the discomfort. And that's really where all of these little techniques about how do we make new choices come in.
What are strategies that would help people recognize that they are emotionally eating, that they are stress eating? Like if we start at the very beginning, someone who's listening to this and is like, oh my gosh, I'm not an emotional eater. I'm not a stress eater. This isn't me. But gosh, I do see that I'm eating not always out of response of feeling hunger. So what would be those strategies to help someone recognize if they're struggling with this or not?
Yeah. So really, from a research-based perspective, one of the things that is really valuable for people to think about is when I'm eating, am I present and mindful? Mindful and intuitive eating has a lot of research behind it. And all that means is, am I actually like sitting down and like eating my meal, or am I on my phone or at my desk or computer? Am I doing it while I'm driving? And that actually matters because when we're distracted from the actual process of eating, we might actually be eating for a reason other than food, right? I would do a check-in about the emotional stuff we've been talking about. Like, how do I do with my emotions? And notice what are my triggers or patterns around food? Like, do I find that I really want to eat something after I've already had dinner? And like now I just like need to eat something while I'm on the couch, right? Like kind of thinking about what are the environments I notice I might be eating for other than nourishment. Food can be enjoyable, but we should also think about, is it for nourishment or is it for another reason? I also like to, offer to people this idea of thinking about like checking in with hunger, right? Like if you're actually hungry, it's probably going to be like a 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe a 10, but many of us in countries where we have access to food don't really get to a 10. If it's more like a 1, 2, 3, that might be for an emotional reason, right? Or for boredom or something else. So even checking in with yourself during the day when you notice you want to have a snack, like where am I actually on the hunger scale? And if you're noticing you're wanting just something, but you're not really that hungry, it might be for emotions. Even if you don't have access to the emotion, there might be something that even happened earlier on in the day, not just that moment, that your brain is still trying to process through. That's something that I think is important for people to realize, is that it doesn't have to be like that exact moment that something emotional has happened that you're now reaching for the food. It could have been something earlier in the day, the week, whatever, another time. And your body is now finding a moment to try to process it. But there's this habit of using food to do it.
Yeah, we have a coach at PhD and she says, true hunger eats a hard-boiled egg.
Yeah.
So if we're standing in front of the fridge, I actually did this with my son yesterday. I was like, are you really hungry? Would you eat a hard-boiled egg? He's like, Mom, I'd never eat a hard-boiled egg.
You're like, okay, so new idea. Yeah. Yeah. It's great that you're teaching your kids that at such a young age. These are such valuable lessons. I think a lot of people, consciousness around food and nutrition and our bodies, that shifts every generation. So people do the best they can with the information they have. But I'm grateful that there's a lot more information coming out these days that can help the hopefully younger generations and even our generations make better choices for their health.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the word diet. So often when we think diet, we have a negative connotation around it. It's associated with, first of all, I think something short term, and then also with restriction and deprivation. It's interesting. There was actually a study done at Harvard looking at how we talk about food and how it actually impacts our body physiology. So if we look at a salad, for example, with some chicken on it, and we think, oh, this is so depriving, I'm on a diet, so restrictive, we produce less full hormones. So that hormone leptin that signals
Yeah.
fullness is reduced. So we're actually hungry after.
Yeah.
Whereas if we go with that salad and we say, oh my gosh, it's so nourishing and it's so filling, and oh my gosh, it's just so luscious and delicious, then our body actually secretes more of that leptin and we feel more satisfied. So how we speak about what we're doing impacts our body physiology. I think that's so wild. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on how we can reframe our mindset around this deprivation and restriction to cultivate a more positive relationship with our food and the healthy food. We always give comfort food and junk food like all these sexy terms and all these like just feeling of nourishment, whereas I think it should be the opposite, that we should talk about the foods that actually give us life in that way. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, such a valuable and important question. And I'm familiar with that study. And there was one done similarly on milkshakes, which was really
Yeah,
interesting, where it
same
was
way.
the exact same milkshake in each glass, but one group was told it was a diet milkshake and the other was told it was like a full fat milkshake. And literally, they were the same exact milkshakes in each glass. And the amount of leptin that the body produced was different in those that thought it was a diet one versus not. And so what it really shows us is this importance of mindset that we're talking about, and perspective and our beliefs to really not just shape how we view our life and ourselves, but our physiology, right? So this goes back to what we started with about behavior change, how you can't just think about it on one level. Like, we are these interconnected beings that, have all of these very complex and beautiful ways that we've been wired to understand our environments. And one of those is language. And the language we use is a really powerful filter for how we perceive of our environment and ourselves. And so, specifically to your question about the word diet, what I like to say to people are all words, diet in particular, but even other words. I had this example once with a client that I've worked with for a while, who's reached their goal and is finding great success. It was a PhD client in maintenance. And I always tell my clients, whatever words I use, please always let me know if it doesn't land right with you. And what I mean by that, like if it doesn't feel like that captures what you're trying to go for. I'm not offended by that. I think language is so powerful. I actually when I first start working with clients, I like say, please stop me and tell me if the word doesn't land. And so I was talking with them and I said the word, oh, it sounds like in this situation, you really want control. And I could tell by their face, the word control did not land. And I stopped myself. I was like, okay, so interesting. I noticed this happened with your face. I'm really curious about what was going on inside of you when I said that. And they said, well, I just don't like the idea of thinking of myself as a controlling person. I don't like that. I'm like, what would it feel like if I said the word safe instead? And they softened. And I was like, okay, awesome. I was like, what I was trying to capture with control, because I think that's what control does for many of us. When we have control, it actually provides a sense of safety. And safety can mean a lot of things, right? And so when we said safety, now the conversation, we had a avenue to like really do some good work, right? So similarly with the word diet, diets hold a lot of meaning for different people, and everyone will have a specific association with that word based on their own life experiences. Some will overlap, but it's still going to be unique. When we use the word diet, right, it brings up for a lot of people feelings of guilt, shame, perhaps failure from past dieting things. Maybe for some people, they were put on diets as kids, and that produced a lot of like shame and guilt and feelings of not being loved and accepted. It can feel like deprivation, right? If I'm on a diet, that means there are things I'm not allowed to have, which actually, psychologically speaking, is very tricky, because when we label foods as good or bad, the research actually shows that we will crave the foods more, the bad foods more, when we've put them in those very black and white, all or nothing categories. So it can really work against us to have these labels that are kind of activating unconsciously. And so with the word diet, I really encourage, as I think we share this, people to think about lifestyle, think about nourishment, think about what you can have, not what you are deciding not to have, and to really feel empowered there, that this is a choice. No one's making you do this, right? To really get yourself into a place where you feel, I want this. And, with all behavior change, what I really tell people that it's important is thinking about intrinsic motivation. Meaning, how does this impact your inner sense of self, your sense of confidence, your long-term way that you want to show up in the world? Your values, bringing in your values can be very important. Like, I want to be someone that is healthy and can be vibrant and be there for the people I love, right? That takes us away from all of these associations with diet that might seem really limiting to now this general, like, bigger perspective that's going to carry us not just short term, but long term about why we're making this change in our food. And it's not just about this like restriction, right? It's about opening up to all of these other things that are available to us and will be available as we continue to make choices that align with our health. You know, one of the other things that I think you've talked about before, and I know I do, that is important to mention in that too, is diet can have a very like judgy tone to it. Like, we either judge ourselves or we're judging all of our actions. And so I like to just tell people it's really important to think about growth mindset, which I think you talk about with people as well, which is just, you know, moving away from this perfectionistic mindset that's really all or nothing, afraid of failure, afraid of feedback, to one that's more about the process and the journey. And I think that's a very helpful mindset to cultivate while we're making behavior change of any kind.
Mhm. Yeah, those are great points. What if someone's like, oh, I'm just so bored?
Mm.
What would you tell, like, what would the strategy? I bet some listeners who are on a weight loss journey are like, I'm just so bored. Maybe another one, and now I'm getting into more, but like, it's just not fair. Like, my husband, my partner can eat this and I can't. Like, what would be some strategies you could help someone with to move them into more of a softer, more beneficial mindset?
Yeah, so that's a really great question and a hard one for some people, because when they hit that comparative place of like, they can have that, why can't I? Or I'm bored. Sometimes underlining that is a sense of like, I'm a victim, or there's,
Mhm.
you know, it's not fair. And, you know, maybe this sounds intuitive to some, maybe it doesn't. What I like to say is, it's really important to actually validate emotion, but not stop there. So if I just tell someone like, oh, get over it, or, oh, you know, like whatever, I don't know, it kind of like makes people sometimes like dig in their heels. Like, we at least want someone to say like, yeah, it's hard that our bodies sometimes are made differently, or people have different metabolisms, or it can be hard if you're going to a party and you see everyone engaging and you want to. But if we just stop at like validating, it doesn't really help anyone move on, right? But if we skip the validating, it's almost like sometimes, not for everyone, but for some people, they'll just hold on more tightly because we want to be seen and known. That's a deep piece of human psychology, right? And so at least in a moment of like, oh, I hear you, that sounds really hard, that, you know, you want that and you can't have it, but don't stop there, right? Like, do it authentically, because it is hard, right? It is hard to sometimes see people enjoying things that maybe we can't enjoy for whatever reason. But I would say move on from there. So what I would say is what we focus on becomes bigger. And our brain actually does this really interesting thing about wanting like confirmation bias. It wants congruency around our beliefs, right? So it goes back to mindset and belief. So if we believe that it's unfair that other people get to eat stuff, or it's unfair that my body does this, or we have this belief driving underneath, our brain is going to really focus on everything that confirms that belief. And it's going to collect all this data throughout our day about how the way we're eating is unfair and I'm bored. And like, these are all the reasons I get to be bored, right? It's going to like give us more evidence to say, oh yeah, that's right, you should hold that belief. So one of the things I would say is you have to go to your mindset and belief about why are you bored? Like, what are you telling yourself about that? What's the story? How can you reframe it? And then also I would say, can we shift our perspective away from that story to something that's actually going to bring you more peace and enjoyment in your journey? So maybe, you know, you would need to mix up what you're eating, or, you know, learn to cook some new recipes. But also, if you're bored, maybe it's time to like do some other activities that aren't related to food that bring you a sense of stimulus and fulfillment. And what are those things that you could think about and create a list about that you could try to bring that sense of fulfillment that isn't just related to food? And I've worked with quite a few PhD clients that come and they have this thing where they go to parties, right? They go to a gathering or something, and totally natural. Like, food is a connection piece. It's hard to go to a dinner party or something and have all this yummy stuff and know that you're making new choices for your health. And what I'll say is, you know, instead of focusing on the food, can you focus on the connection and the conversations that you get to have with people? And then the other thing I like to remind people is that willpower is a really poor model for any behavior change. And science has kind of bore that out for us. It doesn't really help us long term. So I say environment. Think about how your environment is either helping or not. So in this instance of I'm bored, right, or this isn't fair, I would think about, in this food example I'm giving around going out to a meal or a party and thinking this isn't fair, I would actually say, like, make your plate or get your stuff that you can have, and then leave the room that has that big buffet table, right? Or if it's just one room, at least turn your back to it so that you're not like just staring at it even unconsciously, because our brain is scanning our environment all the time. Even while you and I are sitting here talking, my brain and your brain are scanning our environments. And so even if you think I'm not consciously just sitting there staring at the table, if you're facing it and it's behind the people you're talking to, your brain is definitely getting dopamine hits about like, let's go get some more of the whatever, right? And so we have to really think about how our brains are producing all these neurochemicals and environmental cues that are actually maybe getting in the way of our progress. So if you go, get your stuff, get something to have in your hand, some water, sparkling water, whatever, and don't stay in that room with the food, turn your back to it, go outside, like think about the environmental pieces of boredom or feeling like it's not fair, as well as these belief mindset pieces that you and I are speaking about today. Because I think thinking about it in that way is going to produce long-term change for people.
Yeah, for sure. I always tell our clients that environment is always stronger than willpower.
100%. Yeah. And the research bears that out. And, the other piece of that I think is really important that I like to tell clients is when we fall back into the story of willpower, like if I was just stronger, I could figure this out, or if I had more willpower, I would just do it. Underneath that story is a lot of judgment and shame, which actually leads to more self-sabotage. And so when I work with clients, I like really go after those things in particular, even if people don't think they have a lot of it. Our stories can actually contain a lot of underlying beliefs around, if I was just stronger, better, more capable, I would be able to figure this out. And I think that if we can weed that out, like weed it out from the garden, we will produce greater fruit, because those things lead to the cycle of self-sabotage because it erodes our sense of self-worth. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I always share 4 common myths associated with weight loss, and they include eating less, moving more, just needing more willpower, and eating everything in moderation. I think they're all bogus and create big issues within us because we really can't step up into those and actually see success. And I love that you brought up victim mindset. I was just talking to Doug last night, actually. I was like, I've just had such a victim mindset lately, and I can't stand it with the hurricane, and then the kids not in school, and then my kids being sick, and then I get a migraine, and the business, and all. Like, it has just been a season of a lot. And I'm like, I can't stand it, because it is like something that maybe a lot of us fall back to. It's just easy, and it kind of feels right when you have a lot of stuff that seems to be working against you, but it's so powerless. And I'm like, I'm just sick of this. I need to stop. So from a victim mindset, how would you coach someone, let's say they are feeling that way, through that to be empowered and to take personal responsibility? Because even though that road might seem harder, I think it's easier in the long run, for sure.
Yeah, my heart is with you, Dr. Ashley, because I know, your area in particular has been really impacted and so hard. And then, throw on top of that, just life, life is full of ups and downs, and it's hard. It is hard. And so I just wanted to say that, and say that for your area too. Yeah. So, this is such an important question, and it's so layered. So bear with me as I try to do my best to kind of address some of the layers that I hear in the question. And this is what I would do with a client. So one, there's something called polyvagal theory, which really maps how our thoughts and our stories are related to our nervous system, what's happening in our nervous system. So when we say that we either notice that we're in a victim mindset, or we like notice other people might be, what I get curious about all the time, or any mindset for that matter, is, I wonder how that tracks to what's going on in their nervous system. And so what I mean by that is I heard you just say in there, I've noticed I've been in a victim mindset. I hate it. And I notice I feel like overwhelmed. There's so much going on. So right away, I have all this information about like what's happening in your nervous system. And, what's happening in a nervous system oftentimes, and not everyone has a unique journey, but oftentimes that maybe is feeling victim, is we've gone through the fight flight, right? This is like, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to get it better. We're like, all the adrenaline. And now we've maybe gone into more of a freeze state in the nervous system, meaning we're shut down, we're overwhelmed. And that produces additional emotions like hopeless, helpless, or powerless, which is usually what a victim might feel, right? And so that's freeze. That's in the freeze space of the nervous system. Now, this is why I'm so passionate about teaching holistic ways of thinking about what's going on in our minds and bodies, is because we can say like, oh, well, just get yourself out of the mindset. But what we actually need to do in conjunction with thinking about that mindset is thinking about, how do I regulate my nervous system? How do I get myself into a space where actually I feel like my nervous system is kind of more settled? Because it will be easier to transition out of that when we have done that in a holistic way. We've thought about first, how do I cope or soothe the body? How do I provide myself some stress management there? And then, how do I then validate, right? Back to validation, but not stopping there. Validate, yeah, this is hard. It is hard, right? And some self-compassion, like, oh gosh, may I be kind to myself? I'm doing the best I can, right? And then, okay. And then small action steps. What I think can help us move our nervous system and our mind out of that stuck place of feeling shut down or frozen or overwhelmed is picking little things and then celebrating them. So even picking like a little goal, being like, well, I got up today and I helped my kids get through this. And, maybe we got our water back on. Okay, there's something I can feel like is a victory. We're moving in a direction. Because that's the other thing, hope, right? There was this really powerful, interesting article that came out recently, research-backed article. They did some research about, mindfulness. How is mindfulness helping us, and building resilience is what they were talking about. And what the research actually showed is that mindfulness is a very effective tool. And we're talking about behavior change, interoception, knowing what's going on in the body, and mindfulness, very effective, research backed. But resilience actually comes from hope. And hope is noticing and experiencing and envisioning what is going better or could go better in the future, as well as a mix of gratitude, right, for the things that might be moving in that direction that are helping us. And so I think that kind of multi-pronged approach of understanding both what's happening in the nervous system, working with that, dealing with some validation, but then also these micro movements of getting our brain to start to focus on other things because of that confirmation bias, right? And when we're in that shutdown spot, we'll look for all of the reasons why we are victims, versus if we can start to shift it to like, I'm not a victim because of this, or I'm going to be okay because of that. It can help us start to move the table in that direction.
So that's why we establish small habits that work toward our larger goal, so that we can continue to stack wins and build confidence and follow through and have greater integrity with ourselves. Is that right?
That is exactly right. And what that would look like around mindsets, right, might be noticing every time that thought comes up, or the feeling of shut down and overwhelmed. We actually don't just push through or shut it down or tell ourselves, oh, well, these people had it worse, so I should be okay. We might stop actually in a moment of self-compassion and just go, yeah, this is hard. May I be kind to myself? This is a lot. Okay. And then commit to one small action of like feeling, because the action piece is really important, because it makes us feel like we can do something instead of feeling like we're shut down and we can't. So we might say like, I can go make this one phone call and that's going to be good. Or I can go encourage my children and that's valuable to me and my values, right? Or I can go and do this one thing for work and that shows me I'm taking action, and I can have some self-efficacy, right? I can impact my environment in the direction I want to go. So I'm not completely powerless or hopeless to make some change here. And those small things, like you're saying, build on each other, and then over time become our larger goals and successes.
If we don't process those things, I've found with a lot of our clients that past dieting failures, trauma can play a huge role in our current struggle. So how can someone process and overcome these past experiences if we're not, wise at going through them at the time and we just ignore them and store them down? How could you help to coach us through or share with us the impact of trauma and past dieting failures?
Yeah, great question and so important. There's a lot of really interesting research, and in particular, there's this body of research around how the body holds memory. And I'm not going to mention the book that specifically I would tell people maybe to read, because it can have some trigger warnings in it for people that have trauma. And so I don't necessarily want to send people down that path unless they are prepared to maybe do some work with a therapist. But there's a very famous book in that area as well that people can access. If you just look up Body Holds Memory, it'll come up, I'm sure. And so, what I would say first and foremost is, if you know that you've had a trauma experience in your background, or you suspect you might, and you've never had work with an actual trauma informed licensed therapist, it is well worth doing. And I know it can be very scary, but truthfully, because of all the things we're talking about, how our beliefs and our mindsets and our past experiences can impact our behaviors, if we have something like this stored in the body, like a memory of trauma or a memory of traumatic things related to food or our bodies, and we haven't actually created a space to process some of that out or learned what that looks like, it can feel very overwhelming. And we can find that we keep getting stuck at a certain weight or certain place in our journey where that trauma happened. Maybe we were a certain weight when that happened, or certain things around our bodies can bring up, like, I don't want to be seen, or I don't want to be told I'm, whatever, attractive, because that could be triggering. There's a lot of different things that can come up for men and women. And so I would say, absolutely, number one, find a trauma-informed licensed therapist. And there's a lot of great websites and resources for that. I would encourage people to, you can talk to, if you have healthcare, your healthcare provider usually has insurance-based therapists in your area. There's psychologytoday.com has a website where you can put in your zip code, and you can find either people, licensed. I always say, please look up, make sure they're licensed professionals in your area, trauma informed. But that would be the first thing I would say. If you've done some of that work in the past and you feel like, I've got it, I've done it, and now you're just kind of like at that next level where you're like, it's still kind of impacting me, I'm finding that I'm just like stuck. What I would say is, in that instance, you could look at working with someone as a coach, or even working with, your PhD coach around finding healthy coping mechanisms. Some of the stuff we've talked about, or even moving more into like the CBT or thought kind of challenging and reframing beliefs, like we've been talking about today, can be very helpful. Really working on your mind-body awareness. Now, some people aren't into meditation or yoga. That's totally fine. You can do walking meditations. You can do gardening meditations. Like, there's a lot of ways to practice, right, body awareness. But I would say the integration of your awareness into your body through things like a body scan or interoception, which is really understanding what's happening in the body, can be very effective in learning how to sit with uncomfortable emotions and feelings and then start to move through them. But if people haven't gained skills in how to do emotional processing, I think, a licensed therapist or a coach are really a supportive environment to like learn those skills are so valuable for long-term success.
Yeah, I have this weird analogy, and I'd love your perspective. I find that shedding weight is kind of like it follows the pathway of different rings of a tree, of a tree trunk. I don't know, just stick with me. Like,
Yeah.
with each layer comes up for some people the emotions that, or the experiences that happened at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's the wildest thing. And then we get stuck at one ring because we
Mm-hmm.
haven't processed that emotion. And maybe if you're just in a big enough calorie deficit, or taking the medication that's going to allow you to not hear any kind of signals and you just don't eat, maybe you can bust through that ring. But the minute we get back to our natural state, just our normal daily lives, I find we rebound right back up. Again, this is kind of how we started this conversation. We rebound right up to that ring that we haven't worked through emotionally. It's like there's no way to the end but through. Like, you have to go through it to be able to really, I think, conquer the constant weight gain or regain. It's just part of the process. But we're much stronger for it, I believe.
Absolutely much stronger for it. And this visual of the tree ring, I think, is so beautiful. And, as you were saying it, what I was thinking to myself is, and stick with me here now. In our journey, we have this authentic self, which is the core of our being, right? And I was thinking of it as that like center ring of that tree, core, our identity, right? But then what happens throughout our life is we oftentimes build all these other identities, or we have identities around certain seasons in our life or things that happen to us. And they become these like outer shells of our self, right? Like it's not our true nature, our true self, but it's like all of these ways we've learned to like cope, or things that happened, or like pieces of us that kind of get put on us over time, as either a way that we learned how to get our needs met, or a way that we coped, or a way that we were in a certain season. And so as we are moving through that, our body holds memory, and it holds memory in a lot of beautiful ways, which is a whole nother conversation. But as we maybe move through the weight loss journey in particular, what we're talking about here, and we get down to different weights our body was, there's a whole identity around what happened to us at that time. And so depending on what that mindset belief was and identity was around that way our physical body was at that time, those things can come back up. Now, those aren't the whole of who we are, right? That true center, like we're talking about, but they are powerful in terms of our perspectives, our ideas, our beliefs, our mindsets. And so when our body does shift, it actually, I know when I work with a lot of maintenance clients, we spend a lot of time talking about who's this new person that you are? What's this identity? And like how important that is to really get a hold of and feel good about, because just like I'm saying about these different ways that we're shifting through them, even when you get to that place where you're like, this is where I want to be, if we're unfamiliar with who that person is or what that person looks like, because maybe the body looks different in the mirror to them, that's a piece of that identity that I'm saying feels incongruent to them or their brain or their emotions. Yeah. And so it's working through that just as much as it is moving through and letting things go. It's also taking hold of what are the things that are true about me, have always been true, or are beautiful about me that I hold on to, that are that core piece of that tree, right? That I'm not losing. I could never lose. That's just part of who I am.
Yeah. I call that new body syndrome.
Yeah.
If we aren't really accepting that or taking time to get to know the new person that we've become and what it looks and feels like, smells like, tastes like, all of these things. It can feel really foreign and sometimes scary. So actually, I have so many more questions, but one more question for today. And what would you tell the maintenance client, the client who's dropped all this weight, and they've just got this fear that the weight's going to come back? And it's just like, it's just got them down, and they can't even, maybe they're enjoying their weight loss, sure, but like it's just this underlying voice, this fear, so they fully can't embrace all that they've accomplished and who they really are. How would you coach someone through that fear?
Yeah. So, not to sound like a broken record, but I would probably start with validation. No, not in there, right? Like I've said that so many times today. Sorry, everyone. But I would start by saying, something along the lines of, and I mean this, not just saying it to them, but I mean it. Like I can feel in my own body that there's a lot of fear there, and for good reason. There was a lot of pain probably associated with that process of getting to a place and then losing it, and getting it to a place and losing it. And so I would just authentically, my heart to theirs, say like, I believe you. And I know it's scary. It's almost more scary to get what we want sometimes than to not, because it's like, once we get it, we're like, now we're super afraid of losing it. Right. Yeah. And it's almost like easier to just not have it. So my heart fully would be like, I believe you. It is scary. That is real. And that I understand. I hear you. Okay. Then I would start to try to help them really get curious about why that belief is so strong. What if that part of us, there's a part of psychology, and I won't nerd out and get too far into it, but I would just say there is a part of psychology that believes some of these voices, these inner chatter, are actually protective. They're trying to protect us, right? And so if we were instead to not judge it or get mad at ourselves or judge ourselves that it's there, but get curious, like, I wonder what that voice is trying to protect me from, right? And we could come up with a story, you and I today, that maybe it's trying to protect them from disappointment or fear or another failure, or who knows, right? The answer might be unique for that person. But if I got curious and was like, what do you think it's trying to protect you from? That might give us some information that would be helpful to then do the tool we've talked about throughout our conversation today, which is challenge that belief. Why do I believe so strongly that I'm going to have the same past that I had? Because it's not necessarily absolutely true that someone is. Oftentimes, what I like to tell people is, and help their brain start to collect new data, right? How we talked about your brain will collect data to prove your belief. So if you're believing it's going to be the same, you might be collecting data to show yourself it is. But how do we challenge that and say, how am I different now than I was when I didn't maintain success last time? How is that different? The other thing I think is really important for our conversation today, but in general, is when people think that success is going to be linear, they have set themselves up for a lot of pain. So what I mean by that,
Especially with weight loss. I said totally, especially
Yeah.
with weight loss, because the
Yeah.
scale's not going to go down the same pounds every single week.
No. And even in maintenance, you're not going to
Yeah.
stay the exact same. Usually there are going to be points where maybe it goes up and then maybe it goes really low and then maybe it comes back up and then maybe it stays. And maintenance in itself is a victory. Just because the scale's not moving in one way or that's still like, yay for you. Like you're like, so I would say that's a mindset belief thing too, about noticing what beliefs we have about the process now of being in maintenance that are getting in the way, meaning I can't move off of this exact number. And if I do, that means I'm like failing, because what can happen then, if we're in that's a fixed mindset that we talked about before, not growth mindset. If we're in that place, if it moves a little bit in a direction that's upsetting for us, we might use that as an excuse to be like, well, look I told myself I wasn't going to be able to do it. And then all of a sudden now our behaviors are going to follow that messaging and belief that we just believed. And we might start self-sabotaging because we're like, oh, well, I told myself I wouldn't do it and I knew I wouldn't do it. And now here's evidence that I'm not doing it. And then we're off to the races, right? And like, it's like, I heard someone once say, we might have one flat tire. It would be like going out and slashing the other three. Like we don't want to be in that mindset. We don't want to be in that belief system. And so I would work with a client that came to me about fear, about the past experiences around weight loss and maybe success in these ways that is both validating, saying I'm believing you, but challenging, getting curious. What is it, this part protecting you from or afraid of, this voice? And then what's the evidence that we have to the contrary? And how can we build some beliefs and mindsets and coping mechanisms around this story that are going to help you maintain success long term?
Yeah, that's great. Can you share one, and it doesn't have to be a long share, I know we're getting to the end, but just one win that you've had with a weight loss client where you're like, wow, this really melted my heart?
Gosh, I have so many. It's so hard to like pick one. I think I say I have so many because I've just worked with so many great clients, but also because I truthfully do feel deeply moved by the opportunity to work with people and hold their stories. I think people's stories are sacred, and it's a deep honor to do that. So there's a lot that come to mind. I think that recently I worked with a client where I could tell there was a real block around their self-worth. And it's interesting how those stories can just pop up from all kinds of places in our life. Maybe it's our childhood, maybe it's something that happened to us. But what was really powerful and how it was related to their journey was really helping them redefine for themselves and discover their own sense of self-worth that was really intrinsically captured, not just extrinsically focused, meaning I have to have their approval or their applause or their okay for me to be okay. And when they were able to really grab hold of like, oh no, I have self-worth here, it helped shift so many of their behaviors for them to be able to know, like, I'm worth having boundaries. I'm worth taking care of myself. I'm worth, I'm doing the things that bring me joy. It's amazing how being able to really capture that can ripple out so many positive things for them.
Mm-hmm. And their loved ones, I think.
And their loved ones. I was just about to say that and I stopped myself. So I'm so glad you did, maybe because I felt like I was talking too much. But yes, and I think that actually to that point is really important, because sometimes what I see with people that really struggle with self-worth is they think it's selfish to feel okay about themselves. They have this belief, talking about beliefs and mindsets. It's not conscious, but it's kind of down there, that if they feel okay about themselves or feel good about themselves, that it makes them not humble, which is a good value, by the way. Humble is great, but it makes them haughty or like, into themselves. And I always like to tell people like, it's like, I'm Christian and I love the Bible. And there's this piece that says, love your neighbor as yourself. But I always remind people like that, love your neighbor as yourself. Like you can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself. And like, that's such an important thing. We're talking about healthy self-love that allows us to do things from love, not for it. So we're really intrinsically motivated and feel full, and that allows us to show up better for ourselves, but as you beautifully said, for those in our life as well.
Thanks, Dr. Brooke, for coming on. This
Oh,
was
thanks for the
amazing. Yeah, I hope we get
opportunity.
to do it again.
I could talk to you forever. So it's such a joy. Thank you.
Thank
And thanks
you.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, so you guys, before signing off, just if you are a current PhD weight loss client and you want to have the amazing opportunity to chat with Dr. Brooke, just reach out to us, reach out to your coach, and we'll get you connected at special pricing. And even if you're not a PhD weight loss client, you can still connect with Dr. Brooke. And will you share how they can do that best?
Yeah, I have an email that you're just welcome to just email me. It's dr.brooke and then educationalcoaching@gmail.com. That's what I call my services, educational coaching. And so, yeah, I would love to hear from anyone that's interested in even just doing an intro session. You know, I tell people you don't have to commit. You can even just do one session and see how it feels. And I've gotten so many beautiful testimonies from people and like feedback from them and testimonials that just like one session kind of unlocks a lot and they feel so much better and have a lot of information. So even if you're like, I just want to try one, like I would say, please reach out. I would love to connect.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Brooke.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys, that's the show for today. I hope that you thoroughly enjoyed what we talked about. I hope that you got some massive value, some action steps that you can take away to help your journey of overall wellness and good health. Please, if you are watching this on the YouTube show, drop any kind of questions, any feedback below. I would love to have Dr. Brooke back on the show. So if there are any specific topics you want to hear us discuss, or if there are any specific needs that you have, please drop it in the comments below and we are here to help. If you are listening to this on a podcast platform, please leave your review. And remember, if you are a PhD weight loss client and you want some elevated coaching with Dr. Brooke, just reach out to one of your coaches and they will help you guys get connected. If you aren't currently a PhD weight loss client and you want to be, reach out to us. The link should be in the description. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube. All right, you guys, remember, you've got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. I'll see you next time.